Hello everybody, welcome back. My name is Mel and today the first video of 2023 is my favorites of 2022. I cannot believe that I've had a booktube channel long enough to be making this video. That sounds absolutely insane and incredible. I started my channel in February. It's just been an absolutely incredible year booktube wise. As far as my favorite books of 2022, I didn't read as many just absolute favorites as I was hoping that I would. It was a little bit of a dud year as far as my favorite books, but I did manage to read some really good ones, so I wanted to share that with you guys today. This is not going to be a top 10 list. It's actually going to be a top 8. I had 3 honorable mentions, but I just didn't really feel like they were quite there to be in the top of the year, but I will let you know what the honorable mentions were. So we came out with 8 that I think are good enough to be on this list. So I guess let's just jump in. I'm gonna start kind of at the bottom and work my way to my top read of the year. These at the bottom are a little interchangeable. They're not super like hard. This is number 10, this is number 9, 8, etc, etc. Not all of these books were 5 stars. I did have some 4 and some 4.5 stars in here. Some of my 5 stars, even though they were 5 stars in the moment, didn't feel like just favorites of the year, whereas some of the 4 stars really stuck with me, and I think that they deserved a spot on the top of the year because they just really stuck with me. I guess just jumping into everything, let's start with The Overnight Guest by Heather Gutinoff. I don't really know 100% how to say that. This is a thriller that I read at the very beginning of the year last year in January before I had started my booktube channel, and I read it in one sitting. It was absolutely incredible. I had a great time with it. I think I read it in one day over a weekend and I absolutely loved it. Looking back, is it one of my favorite thrillers of all time? Probably not, but I did enjoy it so much in the moment that I definitely thought that it deserved a spot on the bottom of this list. This is following a true crime writer who is being snowed in at a cabin, and when she goes out one day, she finds a little boy that is nearly frozen to death in the front yard of her home, and she brings him in. Then we're flipping back to a different point of view where a girl's family has been murdered and they are looking for this young girl. So I think that this did a good job in my mind of kind of flipping us back and forth between perspectives. It does give you a lot of information, so I won't say that the ending was just absolutely shocking, but it did keep me gripped on the edge of my seat. I think that this is a book that you're really going to need to read relatively quickly. If you take your time with it, you're going to be able to figure out what's going on a little bit too easily, but I had a great time with it and really enjoyed it. So this is going to be the bottom spot for my top of 2022. And then somehow a dark romance is making the list this year with There Are No Saints by Sophie Lark. This is her dark duet where we're following a serial killer who is a sculptor. He becomes obsessed with this young girl who is also a painter. We've got 2 different serial killers that are kind of warring between each other in this art world. It is a romance, but it's not the healthiest of romances for sure. I just had not read anything like this. It was not what I was expected. It really went there and it kept me on the edge of my seat. I just had a great time with it and really enjoyed it. So I thought that it needed to be on this list. Then we have one that really took me by surprise, and that is Feed by Mira Grant. This is set in a dystopian world where our main character is a blogger. This group is going to be following around a presidential candidate, and they come upon things that they didn't really mean to come across, and it develops into the biggest story of their life. I enjoyed Into the Drowning Deep quite a lot. It's one of those books that in the moment I had a lot of problems with it, but over time I've just thought about. And so with Feed, I was expecting to enjoy it, but this is one of those books that I just kept coming back to. I didn't want to put it down. It was not necessarily fast paced, but it kept me very intrigued, and I love the way that Mira Grant is able to craft a story that seems so real. She also was willing to do something that a lot of authors are not willing to do in a book, and because of that, I have a lot of respect for it. I think it needed to be done, but a lot of authors, like I said, are just not willing to do it. And so therefore, I really enjoyed this one, and I cannot wait to get to deadline next year. Then I finally finished a series and read Empire of Gold by S.A. Chakraborty. Empire of Gold is the 3rd and final in the Daevabad trilogy. Kingdom of Copper was one of my favorite reads of last year, and Empire of Gold was on up there. It was amazing. This is following Nahri, that is a thief in I think it's in Cairo, I believe, and one day she gets kidnapped by a deva. And we do have a lot of politics in this world. It is multi-point of view, and I really enjoyed it. Empire of Gold is a great conclusion. It is a big book, but I think it does a very good job with keeping the pacing up and really bringing things together in a satisfying way without you being bored and feeling like it's just a conclusion book. I enjoyed it a lot. I think the politics were great in here, and this is a series that I would highly recommend for people that are wanting to get into adult fantasy but don't really know where to start. This is a great option. Then we have Ashes of the Sun by Django Wexler. You've heard me shout about Django Wexler all year long, and this absolutely had to make it on the top of 2022 list. This is a very fast-paced fantasy with a little bit of a sci-fi blend following Maya, who has been taken away from her family at a young age to be part of the Order, and she has powers and can wield a burning blade. She is helping to kind of keep the peace and is part of the police essentially. And then we have Geyer, who is her brother, but he is on opposite sides. He is part of the rebellion that does not think that the Order needs to be in control of the world, and he does this because his sister was ripped away from him so young. I think that it's a very interesting sibling dynamic that I greatly enjoyed. I love the blend of genres in here. I thought the constructs were really cool. The politics I do think could have been a little bit stronger, but this is a super fast-paced story that just kept me engaged throughout. Again, just like Empire of Gold, I think this is a great place for young adult readers that are trying to get into the epic fantasy world to start. It's more of a new adult story. It does have a little bit of romance in there. It's got a lot of sibling dynamics, and it's not overly confusing. I really enjoyed it, and obviously it needed a spot on the top of the year. I have actually read books 2 and 3 and finished off the trilogy, and I can say that if you enjoyed this first book, I think that you will also really enjoy the rest of the trilogy. They are super strong, and I highly recommend. Now on to the final 3, and this is going to be somewhat shocking for people because I'm a fantasy girly. This is mostly a fantasy channel. We do read some horror, thrillers, and sci-fi around here, and I actually am wanting to get into more horror and sci-fi in the coming year. Not going to be getting rid of my fantasy, but I do definitely want to amp up how much of those genres that I'm reading, and there's a reason for that, because at number 3 we have Recursion by Blake Crouch. This is a sci-fi novel. I read Dark Matter a few years ago and really enjoyed it, and Cassidy was loving Recursion, so I read this for Realmathon as one of her favorites. Absolutely loved it. It follows memory, and there is a question about people that are coming back and saying that they have all of these memories in this other life and then jumping off of buildings or killing themselves because they just can't manage to coincide the two lives or the two memories that they are holding. And he is going to kind of unravel how this is being done. It does have some time travel element to it. I really enjoyed just the fast-paced nature and the science behind this. I didn't love the characters as much, but because there was so much else going on, I didn't necessarily need to, and really enjoyed it. I do think that most people that like Dark Matter don't like Recursion as much. People that love Recursion don't like Dark Matter as much. I loved both. I think that they were both excellent and definitely would recommend it. And I'm hoping to read the Wayward Pine series by Blake Crouch sometime in the coming year. I read Upgrade and didn't absolutely love it. I felt like it was very similar to the previous books, but Wayward Pines I think is pretty different from the 3 that have come out more recently. I know that the series itself doesn't get great reviews, but I'm excited to at least give the first one a try. And then number 1 and number 2 were pretty hard for me to decide between, and honestly you probably could switch them back and forth because they were both excellent and they were both sci-fi. There were several of this series that probably could have made this list, but really the only true standout that was a 5-star, read like half of it in a day, and this is a big book, was Caliban's War by James S.A. Corey. Caliban's War is the second book in the Expanse series, and I just had the best time with this book. Leviathan Wakes is a space opera. It follows a crew of James Holden and this virus that is starting to take over and kill people. I don't really want to say a whole lot more than that because it is a pretty big scope, but this is the second book in that series and I just adored it. The main reason that I loved this one and the main reason that the other books in the series are not on this list is because of the characters. characters. We have a character called Bobby and Badass Grandma, as Rachel would say. Asavara, I think is how you say her name. Those two characters stole the show in this book for me. They were sassy and hardcore. I just absolutely loved them alongside James Holden and his crew, and having their points of view just really made this book for me. And unfortunately, because they weren't main characters in later books, I think that that's why those books did not quite reach 5-star feel levels for me, because I just fell in love with those characters, and the scope of the story combined with that made it one of my absolute favorite reads of the year. And then last but not least, I'm a little bit behind the game because this was on a lot of people's favorites list last year and I didn't read it until January of this year, and that is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I have not read Emma, don't kill me. Clementine, don't kill me. I have not read The Martian yet. I'm working on it. It's gonna happen. But I did decide to start with Project Hail Mary and absolutely loved this story. It is set in a time where scientists discovered that the sun is getting dimmer and dimmer and dimmer, and if it is completely sucked dry of all of its energy, of course the world is going to end. So they get together this team to send out to try to figure out exactly where these creatures, these little microscope things are coming from that are stealing energy from the sun. Crap happens and our dude ends up on the mission himself and chaos ensues, essentially. This has some really great character work in it. It is a very isolated story with a very limited cast of characters, so if you are somebody that loves a really big character cast, then this might not work for you, but it was a good enough relationship and dynamics for me, and I still enjoyed the main characters so much that were in here that it didn't really affect me that much. I love a science-based sci-fi, something that is rooted in reality and really gives you that science behind the science fiction. I think that Andy Weir does a really good job of including that in here without you making you feel stupid. It's part of his world building. It's kind of like a fantasy novel where you may not understand all the intricacies of the world, but it's provided to you in a way that it's just building this imagery, and so it doesn't really matter if you don't understand all the intricacies. I think that Andy Weir does a very good job of doing that in his sci-fi novel. I'm definitely going to be reading The Martian sometime this year. I loved this, and I cannot believe that it took me so long to read it after everybody was screaming at the rooftops last year. Okay, so those are my top 8 books of 2022. Really quickly, let's go through the honorable mentions. The first one is going to be a very short novella, and that's The Fall by Ryan Cahill. This is super quick, but it gives you everything that you need and packs a huge punch in like 60 or 70 pages. This can be read before or after of Blood and Fire, but I think that it's probably better to read it after. I think that's the way that he intended it was written and published after. But it follows the events of The Fall. There's a lot of dragons and battle and world building in here, and I absolutely loved the pace of this. It was great, and I might reread it before I continue on with Of Darkness and Light, because the events from The Fall are pretty heavy in that book, and that's why I think it would be better to read them in between. One other honorable mention is Rune of Kings by Jen Lyons. This one was a 4-star read for me. I really enjoyed it when I read it earlier this year. It's a complicated fantasy involving a lot of familial lines and people that may or may not be who they say they are. I'm not going to give much more of a synopsis from that because I don't want to spoil things, and honestly, it's so intricate that I don't think I would do a very good job. There are footnotes in here. I definitely think that the audiobook is the way to go, and I greatly enjoyed it, and I need to continue the series because the further away I get from books 1 and 2, the less I remember, and this is not a series where you want to forget. And then last but not least is one that I don't own, and of course I had to put a Darcy Coates on here. It really was a struggle for me to decide which one that I wanted to do an honorable mention for. Most of the Darcy Coates that I've read have been 4-star reads, but I've just had such a great time with them that I did want to include one on this list. I think I'm gonna go with From Below. I've been in a water horror mood this year, and for the most part, this book gave me exactly what I wanted. I'd of course had some problems with it, but as a general rule, had a wonderful time. I read it at the beach. It was the perfect setting. It's super creepy. It follows our cast of characters that are trying to do a documentary for a ship that they found the wreckage for that sunk many years ago. They never found out what happened to the crew, and they've come across this wreckage, and then we're flipping back and forth between that timeline where they are exploring the wreckage and the past timeline where we actually have the crew and what happened on the ship. I think that for the most part, I enjoyed the present timeline a lot more. I think that she did a really good job giving you the creep factor and really amping up that sense of dread, and I highly recommend it. I've got a vlog where I read the whole thing while I was at the beach, so I will leave that up in the corner for you guys if you want to check that out. Okay, everybody, so thank you so very much for watching. I cannot believe that we are talking about my favorite books of 2022. Let me know down in the comments which books were your favorites of 2022. What was your absolute, you've got to read this book, because I would love to check some of those out. So stay tuned for my most disappointing and worst books of 2022 coming later this week, I think on Thursday or Friday. I unfortunately did have more duds than I had wins, but we gotta talk about them. We got to go through everything. So I'll go through those with you guys later this week. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, links to my Patreon, Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads are all in the description box down below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up and subscribe if you wanna, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.